Well, welcome everyone to this special event, which Pembroke College is delighted to be co-hosting with our American Alumni Foundation. I'm joined today not only by our distinguished panel, but by Pembroke and Oxford students, alumni and friends from around the world. Nearly 200 people are logged on to this event, which is unprecedented for a college event. If there's one silver lining of the global coronavirus pandemic, surely it is the leap we have made to holding engaging online events, which we already take for granted. Of course, we all look forward to the return of in-person social occasions here in Oxford and elsewhere, but I suspect there will continue to be a place for online events in the future. Opportunities to gather our global Oxford community together to do what unites us, to learn, to debate, and to connect. I am delighted that we've been able to assemble such an auspicious panel of speakers for this post-United States election discussion. All have different angles and opinions on US politics today, and we're also very pleased to have a neutral moderator in the shape of the BBC journalist Tanya Beckett. May I introduce you to our event co-host, the president of the Pembroke College Foundation of North America, Tom Herman. Tom is a Pembroke alumnus, a lawyer, and a United States political advisor who came to Pembroke in 1971 to read for his DPhil in politics. For many years now, he's been the president of the Pembroke North American Foundation, which brings alumni together for events, as well as supporting the college with financial assistance. We are very grateful for their continued involvement in the life of our college. Now it's over to you, Tom, for this evening.
Well, thank you very much, Master. And on behalf of Pembrokians everywhere around the world, welcome to Pembroke College. How appropriate it is that Pembroke is hosting this discussion of American politics. For over 300 years, there has existed a special relationship between Pembroke and America. Pembrokian James Smithson founded the eponymous Smithsonian Institution. Abraham Lincoln learned the law by reading the commentaries of Pembrokian William Blackstone. And in more recent times, two distinguished United States senators, William Fulbright, pardon me, and Richard Lugar, chaired the powerful United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And President Bill Clinton's Oxford tutor was Pembroke's legendary Zbigniew Pelczynski. Well, we're fortunate today to welcome to Pembroke, to Oxford, and to this panel, another distinguished United States Senator Angus King, independent of Maine. Senator King was elected to the Senate in 2012 and re-elected in 2018. He is a member of two of the Senate's most sensitive committees, the Special Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee. He is a co-chair of the very important United States Cybersecurity Solarium and is a former two-term governor of Maine. We're also joined by Ambassador Philip Lader, who in the Clinton administration was the administrator of the Small Business Administration and also ambassador to the Court of St. James. Phil is a former Democratic candidate for governor of South Carolina. And I had the pleasure of meeting Phil for the first time when we rode in a Pembroke quad. Well, Phil knew what he was doing. I certainly did not. And finally, Stuart Stevens, a true Renaissance man, a best-selling author, an extreme sports enthusiast, a screenwriter, and one of the most prominent and successful Republican political consultants of our generation. He's also a co-founder of the Lincoln Project. His most recent book, the best-selling It Was All a Lie, is an insightful and candid analysis of the current American Republican Party from someone who knows all the players and where all the bodies are buried. And finally, our distinguished moderator, Tanya Beckett, who needs no introduction to our British audience. She is a well-known, award-winning BBC reporter and presenter, has reported from many countries around the world. And I might add, she read metallurgy, I believe, as an undergraduate at Pembroke, achieving a double first. Tanya, thank you so much. Panelists, thank you. I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. It is a great honor to be amongst such distinguished guests. And thank you very much, Tom, for arranging all of this. And Master, thank you also. I woke this morning, as did many Europeans, to the news that Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer, had something called a hair dye malfunction, as it was in our tabloid newspapers. Those of you familiar with the UK press will be not surprised by the fact that we were more obsessed by that than in fact what he was trying to say. What he was trying to say was a little bit confusing, but he was referring to what he saw as fraud and rigging within the US election. There have been many things that have happened in the course of this US election that have been surprising, and a hair dye malfunction was perhaps among the smallest of them. So allow me then to first come to this question of the election and how it's going to play out in terms of the results. So let me come first to you, if I can, Stuart, and ask you that question. How do you think these events are going to play out between now and January?
I think it's going to play out like any other election. I think the electors are going to meet, and Joe Biden is going to be the next president of the United States. None of this is going to affect any of the outcome. The long-term effects of having a president of the United States challenge the legitimacy of American democracy and 70+ million people believing him, I think could be, well, will be very troubling at best, and destabilizing and unfortunate. But Joe Biden's going to be the next president of the United States, and Senator Harris is going to be the next vice president.
Angus, if we could come to you then, as a senator, and it's been pointed out already that you are in fact an independent. We'll come to what that means very shortly. But how do you see this playing out over the next few weeks?
Well, I agree with Stuart, although our president is, as of today, embarked on an unprecedented and incredibly dangerous path. It's not unusual in our elections, as I'm sure it is in yours, to have recounts and allegations of irregularities, and you work through them and you get the recount done and you certify the election. And that's what's been going on the last couple of weeks, although the underlying reality is there's been no evidence of the kind of widespread fraud or irregularities that Rudy Giuliani and others and the president are talking about. It's one thing to have a press conference. You can say whatever you want in a press conference, but you can't do it in court. And their showings in court have been woefully inadequate in terms of the facts. But what I mean by today being a kind of watershed is today the president of the United States has invited legislators from the state of Michigan to the White House to discuss the possibility of the Michigan legislature, which is controlled by the Republicans, disregarding the popular vote in Michigan and handing the electoral college votes to Donald Trump. This is a strategy that's been talked about, but I think no one took it very seriously. I hope that Stuart is right, but the reality is the hold that Donald Trump has over the Republican voting base is like nothing else that I can remember. And so any Republican politician crosses him at their extreme peril. So I think it's unlikely that this new strategy of causing this overall confusion, delaying the certification, and having the legislators step in is unlikely, but it's not impossible. And it's extremely disturbing because basically what it is, Donald Trump saying, I don't care about democracy. I don't care what the people say. I don't care about where the votes were. I want to stay in power. And that's, I said to a reporter an hour ago, a dagger in the heart of our democratic system.
Phil, if I could come to you, you served, as Tom pointed out, you served under Bill Clinton as US ambassador to the UK. It would be an awkward situation if you were representing your country abroad right now.
No question, it's a very difficult job for any of our ambassadors or anyone in the federal government. One point, though, I think might be interesting to our non-US participants in this session, and that's the mood of the country. The most recent poll regarding the American attitude towards the president's decision yet to concede, 46% of those polled said that he should concede now. Those who said if there is no fraud shown, an additional 32% said he should concede. But the percentage that said that he should not concede, that he should refuse, was 12%. In fact, 27% of registered Republicans say that Donald Trump should never concede. So it's not just interesting for those who serve on our foreign posts, but the mood of the country essentially is very divided in many ways too.
Stuart, let's come back to that issue. Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are going to have a job now trying to unite the country because the vote was in fact pretty well divided.
Yeah, I'm very pessimistic on the Republican Party, but I'm very positive on the country.
I think that's clear from the title of your book.
Yes, right, yeah. Well, actually, I finished this book called It Was All a Lie a year ago, and pretty bleak picture of the Republican Party, but I have to say, looking at recent events, I think I was overly optimistic. I never, call me naive, I never would have thought that.
I think we've lost Stuart there for a moment. I think, yes, it looks like he's frozen there for a moment. If we can come back to you, Angus, there is this question of the division. There is this question that, in fact, the Democrats don't have a vast control of the lower house, and it's questionable what control they will have over the Senate. So the numbers don't really work in favor of Joe Biden being able to have his way on everything he's going to have to negotiate.
Well, the Democrats have a majority in the House. Still, it's not as large as it was. In the Senate, it's the Republican margin has gone from 53-47 to, at best, Republicans 52-48. There are 2 Senate seats in Georgia that are still up for grabs. But your underlying point is correct. Regardless of how all those numbers come out, there's going to have to be negotiation and there's going to have to be cooperation. The question is whether Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, decides to govern or obstruct. He famously said the day after Barack Obama's inauguration in 2009, we're going to do everything we can to see that this man is a one-term president and we're not going to enable anything that he does. If he takes that attitude again, we're going to have trouble, regardless of where the numbers fall out. And the real interesting question is, to what extent will his members of his Republican caucus in the Senate let him do that? Because there are a number of Republicans, I know them very well, who want to govern, who want to make policy, who want to debate and discuss and try to get things done. And the question is whether they will follow Mitch McConnell over this obstructionist cliff, or whether they will force him to allow some governing and negotiations to go on. That's an unanswered question right now. And for our British viewers, what they need to know is the majority leader of the United States Senate has absolute dictatorial control over what comes to the Senate floor. If the leader decides he doesn't like a bill, even if it came out of a committee unanimously, or if it came from the House with a heavy vote, a bipartisan vote, if the majority leader doesn't want to bring it to the floor, it doesn't come up. He also can restrict debate to little or no debate, little or no amendments. So the majority leader has this power that would make Julius Caesar blush. And that's just the reality of our system. So as I go back to my point, if he decides he wants to try to help govern, we can get some things done. If he decides to obstruct, it's going to be very difficult.
Stuart,
But
I see that you're back.
Yes.
Excellent. So we can come back to you and ask this question about to what extent now Republicans will be inclined to attempt to cooperate with the Democrats. We were just looking at the numbers in the House and in the Senate and saying what a difficult task it would be.
Well, I think the outcome of this Georgia Senate race, both these Senate races could have a profound impact on that. You know, there is a race that'll be January 5th, where there is the potential that Democrats could still take control of the Senate. That's unlikely. It'll probably end up being Republican, but it's a possibility. You know, I have this feeling that the country has forgotten what it's like to have a normal president and to have a normal person as president, and that very quickly there's going to be sort of a sense of relief about it. Politics should be boring. And I think people don't want a president in their life the way Donald Trump has been in everyone's life. So I think that that's going to give President-elect Biden a certain power, because he'll be more in sync with the country. I think there's an exhaustion in the country. I think what they're going to proceed on is focus on COVID and, you know, try to save people's lives. You'll have the benefit. It looks like the vaccines are going to play out. So I think it'll be an unusual first 100 days, because there's a pandemic unlike any other that we faced, you know, in 100 plus years. And I think that when you look at the people that he's bringing into the office and compare to the White House and compare them to this sort of clown show that have been in there, it's going to be just an extraordinarily stark contrast of just sheer competency and seriousness of intent that I think will sit well with the country and be persuasive for following him.
Phil, would you agree with that there is a sense of national exhaustion? And we haven't talked about the pandemic, but of course, there's been a huge amount of news in the last week over Moderna's vaccine, also Pfizer and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And, you know, certainly talk in this country that there is an expectation now that they will start to roll it out in the coming weeks. Perhaps that will change the tone in the nation, Phil. Is that possible?
I think it is possible, and we can be hopeful in that regard, but you recognize that it's not only the concern of those who are the followers of President Trump, but the liberals feel that this is some way less a victory than a reprieve from what 4 more years of Donald Trump might have brought. I hasten to point out, when Angus explained the power of the Senate Majority Leader, that's a power that's traditionally held, not just Mitch McConnell, and Angus's predecessor, George Mitchell, as Senate Majority Leader, exercised the same power. And so the difficulty that I'm suggesting by that is there's going to be some broadening, tightening coalition amongst the Democrats themselves. You've got progressives in both parties who have outweighed control and influence in primaries. And with Senate elections up for 1/3 of the Senate in 2 years, all of the House up for 2 years, before we can get to the serious business of governing, as Stuart points out, we need to have some reckoning within the parties themselves of the elected officials in the Congress.
I'd like to come also to the Democrats, and we've talked about this question, and Stuart has highlighted about this division within the Republican Party. And perhaps I should just come back to you and clarify that a little bit, Stuart. So your view was after 2016 was when that division really started to open up after the election, very soon after the election. Just to come back to the Republicans for a moment before we moved on to the Democrats, Stuart.
Well, look, my conclusion about Donald Trump was not that he hijacked the Republican Party, but that the Republican Party had become a party that almost necessitated the election of a Donald Trump. There were those of us who were involved in the party who worked for President Bush and sort of call it a compassionate conservative side. And I think a lot of us assumed that we were the dominant gene in the party, and that what we saw as the darker side of the party was a recessive gene. And that we were inevitable, if only because the country was changing and the party would want to change to meet that changing tone and demographic of the country. I don't know any conclusion but to come to, but we were wrong. And we were the recessive gene. And Donald Trump is very popular in the Republican Party because Republicans want someone like Donald Trump, which I think is a very chilling reality. We've always had a politics of hate in America, but it's never been embraced by a major party the way that I think that it has been by the Republican Party today. And I don't see this that changing anytime soon. There's no market for an anti-Trump Republican in the Republican Party. And I don't see it happening until a lot of these people start to lose and fear drives them to change.
Let's come to the Democrats. The Democrats are also a split party. Stuart, how would you see, just briefly, and I'd like to ask Angus the same question, how you see divisions within the Democrats? Because where I'm getting to is whether the centrists are liable to try to negotiate.
I think the way I look at it is that, we talk about why isn't there a third party in America? And I would argue there are three parties. There's two parties inside the Democratic Party, and then there's the Republican Party. There's sort of call it a Bernie Sanders party and a Joe Biden party. And I think that the big policy questions in America are going to be decided by those divisions within the Democratic Party. I don't think the Republican Party is going to play a particularly useful role. I mean, take national health insurance. In 10 years, are we going to be the only Western country that still doesn't have national health insurance? It's hard to imagine. I think we will. And what that will be, I think, will be determined by the division inside the Democratic Party.
Angus, so to come to you and ask you this same question about the split within the Democratic Party. How serious is that in terms of trying to find some sort of consensus?
Well, as you mentioned at the beginning, I'm an independent, but when I first came to Washington, I had to choose one of the caucuses or the other, because that's how you get your committee assignments. That's how you develop your seniority and your role. So I chose to sit with the Democrats. And so I sit with them every Tuesday for lunch, which, by the way, really interesting. This is a parenthetical. I think as of today, Rick Scott from Florida has tested positive for the coronavirus. I looked down the list. There have been 9 Republican senators who have been positive and 1 Democrat who had antibodies who doesn't even know when and where he got it. That's no coincidence, because the Republicans have had live in-person lunches, for example, every week. We haven't had, the Democratic caucus hasn't had an in-person lunch since March. But in any case, I sit in this divided party and I see it. And it definitely is. Stuart's absolutely right. It's center left and left is what we're really talking about. And right now, center left is Joe Biden. And he talks about climate change. He talks about health insurance, but he doesn't talk about Medicare for all or the Green New Deal. So it's really a question of, it's not a question so much of direction, but of pace, and trying to confront some of these issues. Now, we're actually starting to see some Republican interest in things like climate change. We just had a meeting yesterday with the European Union, as a matter of fact, of something called the Climate Solutions Caucus, which is entirely bipartisan. It's the first time in my memory that the Republicans have been involved in anything involving climate. So, it may be inchwise progress, but I think there is a recognition within many of the Republicans that this is something we have to confront. Now, what we do about it, of course, is another question, but there's no question. But one of the other changes in the Senate is the parties used to have a great deal of overlap. There were 20 Democratic senators who were more conservative than the most liberal Republican senators. Now there is zero overlap. So the parties have become much more ideological than they ever were before in American history. And I remember studying in college where my professor said, wouldn't that be a good idea? Well, turns out it's not really such a good idea, because every election turns into Armageddon. Instead of elections being decided in the center, you have Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden. You have this tremendous split. So there are divisions, and they're going to continue. Hopefully, we will be able to overcome them and include Republicans. The best laws are bipartisan. And so I don't think we can say the Democrats, they're not going to have the votes to cram down a major change in health insurance. There's going to have to be some bipartisan discussion.
Okay, if we can come to you then, Phil, and ask this question about how split the nation is. There's a question from Monica Birch. Hi, Monica, who was at university with me at the same time, not very long ago, obviously. It says, notwithstanding the close result, the predictions by the media were strongly pro-Biden. Why did the pundits call it so? Is America as split as it appears to be? Phil.
Well, there are several questions there. First, the polls were significantly wrong, and that's largely because of the hidden or secret or quiet Trump voter. And you have to recognize that while Joe Biden won the most votes of any presidential candidate in American history, the candidate who won the second most votes in American history for the presidency was Donald Trump. So we're talking about more than 70 million people who, for one reason or another, supported the re-election of President Trump. The division in the Democratic Party is that by embracing Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, candidate Biden and now President-elect Biden has put together the broadest ideological coalition in recent American history. And so it's exactly what Stuart and Angus have mentioned in terms of almost being two Democratic parties. And you have to recognize is some of the Democrats who were reelected this time are relatively moderate. And certainly of those up for re-election in 2 years, a significant number of them are relatively moderate. And so Joe Biden has the opportunity to be presenting the Democratic platform, but speaking to the Sanders and to the Warrens of the Congress, saying that we have to have a more moderate approach to these policies if we're going to have any success. The people are generally divided, whether it is something that can die down by virtue of rational governance from Washington. I'm hopeful, but I'm not quite as convinced of it as Stuart is at this point.
Stuart, whether the role of Donald Trump or not going forward probably will inform us a little bit as to the course of American politics. What role do you think he will seek within the party, and might he seek re-election?
Listen, I think Donald Trump runs the Republican Party and is going to continue to run the Republican Party. Trumpism is deeply embedded in the Republican Party. I'll give you just a little example. You know, there's sort of another Republican Party that exists out there, and that's these very popular governors who are Republican, who are elected in deep Democratic states, Vermont, Massachusetts, Maryland. And these Republican governors are wildly popular. They're great public servants. They're doing a great job. I work for all of them. I love these guys. But they can't pick their own state party chairman, which in American politics is just unimaginable, that a popular governor can't even pick their state party chairman. And it just shows how out of touch they are with their own party. And this is not going to go away. When you look at the people who are thinking about running for president in 2024, it is going to be a competition of who can be the most like Donald Trump. And that's not going to change. I think there's a good chance that Donald Trump may run again. I think that possibly one of his children will run again. His daughter-in-law has already announced for the Senate in North Carolina. This is a Donald Trump party, and I think it's going to be that way for the foreseeable future.
Angus, if Donald Trump does continue to play a very important role in or very visible role, certainly within the Republican Party, is that good for unity within the opposition?
Well, certainly it will have that effect.
Soon to be the ruling party.
I think it will have that effect. I mean, he's sort of a rallying point, and this election was in many ways a referendum on him. It was a positive vote for Joe Biden for sure, but part of it was we don't want 4 more years of what we've just seen. One of the interesting things about Donald Trump is that he really doesn't have an ideology. He's not a traditional Republican in the sense of small town, Main Street values, balanced budgets, small government. He doesn't fit those Midwestern values. He doesn't fit any of those boxes. So he'll continue. Stuart's right. He'll certainly continue to be the major force in the Republican Party, but it's by dint of personality and his almost cult-like following. The famous line, the truest thing Donald Trump ever said was, "I could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and my followers would still be with me. And that has proven true over the past 4 years. And I think one of the most shocking poll findings, assuming there's some reasonable accuracy, is the number of Republicans who feel the election was rigged or stolen has doubled in the last 2 weeks. Not because any evidence has been produced, but because the president has kept telling them this, and they are believing it. And so that's going to make it very, very difficult. And if he sits out there and tweets and says, if you vote for this compromise bill that Biden has put forward on immigration, you're on my kill list, you're on my my tweet list, that could stymie governance. I talked about Mitch McConnell, but Donald Trump is going to be sort of Banquo's ghost out there, scaring everybody, and it could keep us from getting to a place where we're able to govern.
Phil, how would you encapsulate what Trumpism is, and whether you see it replicated in other countries in a way that is meaningful? I mean, we often link it to Brexit in the UK and other countries where we've seen a similar sort of pattern develop. Do you link it to that, or do you see it something which is perhaps more linked to his personality?
I think you have to look at it in two very different perspectives. One is Trump, the individual, and then Trumpism. Trump, the individual, survived impeachment. He has survived more than 26 sexual misconduct allegations. He has survived thousands of lawsuits as a businessman. He had a 44 to 46% approval rating throughout his presidency. And so as an individual, whether he buys a media platform to stay alive, or whether, frankly, as you recall, on Inauguration Day 2017, he filed for re-election back then as he was being inaugurated. He may do so again now because there's very good self-interest in his staying as a candidate, not simply to keep himself alive and to have whatever financial commercial value there is, but also perhaps to be able to, as litigation or prosecution ensues, for him to claim that this is politically motivated. Trumpism, however, looking at it the second way, is more of the phenomenon. And in that sense, while we may have a kindler, gentler set of faces in the Republican Party, as Stuart has said, Trumpism itself is unlikely to go away. And so Trump is an individual, and those who suggest he's so much like Boris Johnson, well, I'll leave that to the amateur psychologists to determine. But in terms of the phenomenon that you mentioned in other countries, particularly in Europe, and amongst some of the countries that have rather totalitarian role today, Trumpism persists and has many similarities. The forgotten people, the sense their concern about the elites, the fact essentially that there has been, in reality, a disproportionate aggregation of wealth. There's a greater Grand Canyon in America and many of the European nations today than there has been throughout the 20th or this century. And that has not been addressed adequately by those who govern. So in that sense, the Trumpism phenomena is akin to what we see in other countries, but there are very few people like Donald Trump as an individual.
Yeah, Stuart, he certainly has an ability to resonate with people in terms of his personality. And I guess Joe Biden and many politicians can learn something from that. Do you think that they are learning from that? Do you think there are things that one can take from Trumpism into the next administration? And should Joe Biden really learn the lesson?
Well, that's a fascinating question. As much as the Republican Party is dominated by Trump, when you look around at other Republican candidates who are winning, they're really not like Donald Trump, though they say they support Donald Trump and they support Trumpism. It's a fascinating phenomenon. I think that when the White House changes parties, it usually goes to someone who is the mirror opposite of the person who's in the White House now. And I think that that's played out here. I mean, Joe Biden is the opposite of Donald Trump. I would just say one thing to add to what Phil said. Personally, and there are those who disagree with me, and I hope they're right, but I think racial animosity is a lot of what Trumpism is about. I think that the Republican Party has become predominantly a white grievance party. And it's not that Donald Trump made people more racist, but he has, I think, validated feelings of racism and grievance. And I think that's extraordinarily destructive. I don't think there's a long-term future in it in the country. I mean, if you look at Americans who are 15 years old and under, the majority are non-white. That's the future of America. I mean, odds are good they're going to turn 18 and still be non-white.
Okay, sorry, Stuart, the internet connection was getting a bit unstable there. So I'm going to pick up on what you said, and also with regard to the race issue, but also come back to the Democratic Party. So it says here in one of the questions, let's just talk about the Joe Biden for a moment, because we can get very distracted by Trump, can't we? Angela Daniel asks, is there a chance that Joe Biden will bring Bernie Sanders on his cabinet to appease Bernie's base? Angus, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I've heard speculation. He's been mentioned as a possible Secretary of Labor. This is politics within politics. The governor of Vermont is a Republican. So if Bernie is appointed to the cabinet, it would vacate his Senate seat, and the Republican governor of Vermont would have the appointment to put in his replacement. I think that would give pause to Joe Biden just for that sort of raw political number. I think they would be loath to lose with the Senate as closely contested as it is. I think they would be very, I think it would be very difficult for them to say, well, we're going to put Bernie in the cabinet and give up a seat in the Senate. So that's a sort of practical consideration. I wanted to mention one other thing based upon some of the things that both Stuart and Phil were saying. There's a more fundamental problem going on in this country, and I suspect in Great Britain and around the world, and that is the balkanization of information. And the fact that people are now getting their information from sources that confirm their biases. It's even, you've heard the term confirmation bias. And what I've found in public service, both as a governor and a senator, is if you can get people in the room that agree on the facts, it's pretty easy to get to a solution of policy. If they don't agree on the facts, you can never get to a solution. And we're becoming a country of people that are literally living in different factual realities. And that makes it almost impossible to solve problems. And it makes it almost impossible for any politician to achieve any kind of consensus, because people, you know, if you're conservative, you watch Fox News, and if you're liberal, you watch MSNBC, and if you can't make up your mind, you watch PBS. I mean, but seriously, it is a really serious underlying problem that undermines our ability in every other area. If we can't agree on the facts, we'll never find any answers to difficult problems.
Okay, let's come back. Thank you very much indeed. I still haven't addressed the issue of race. I'm about to, but we have an email from Miranda. What do you think that Americans who are concerned about the state of our democratic institutions can most productively do at present and in the coming months? Phil, if we can come back to you, we were talking a little bit earlier about the cost of the elections, and there's been much written about the system of electoral college. Has what is happening now thrown really a big question as to whether the States is adequately democratic?
Well, there are really three questions there as I see it. First, this election proves what a business phenomena, economic phenomena, American elections are. In this cycle, more than $14 billion are estimated to have been spent. There was twice as much in the presidential race that was raised as in 2016. This time, the Democrats doubled what the Republicans raised. Joe Biden, as a presidential candidate himself, raised more than $1 billion. That's more than any presidential candidate ever before. So there is no question that money is playing a much greater role in the electoral process than ever before. Secondly, if we look at the administrative process, not only the complication of the Electoral College, and I won't get into the pros and cons of retaining that, but you look at the fact that in the United States presidential election system, we have 10,500 separate administrative entities. And consequently, The ability to determine what the ballot looks like, how the ballots are counted, when they're counted, is a very fragmented administrative process. That's a complication further. But most importantly, I think, is the third and broader issue, is how vibrant is democracy in America today? The Rand Corporation has done extensive studies into what they term, I think most aptly, truth decay. And this comes back to what Angus was just discussing. The civic infrastructure of our nation has disintegrated to a very large degree. Civic education is not taught in the public schools and in not many of the private schools either. The extent to which there is civic engagement, active participation in civic clubs and the like, has decreased. And consequently, when you look at Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, which he's updated with a new book now, there is a real phenomenon essentially of a fragmentation of the American populace. And so there's no surprise that in the polity as to governance, you see similar distraction, if not fragmentation as well. I think democracy is at risk. And in that sense, I think Joe Biden, having a decent, honest individual who seeks coalitions, will be very affirming to the restoration of democracy. But we've got a way to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's turn now to the question of not just race, but also women, the vice president, and perhaps Joe Biden's age. Angus, I'm going to come over to you and ask what your thoughts are on Kamala Harris.
Well, I remember I mentioned the word bias. I'm biased in favor of Kamala. She has literally sat next to me in the Intelligence Committee for the past 4 years. So I've had a chance to get to know her, to talk offline, to see her as she reacts to problems, ask questions. I'm a big fan. She's very smart. She's very tough. And yet she manages to be, as my father used to say, she manages to disagree without being disagreeable, which is an important quality, I believe, in this day and age. So, and her election is historic. I mean, and I think, vice presidents have a way in American history of ending up as presidents, not necessarily because of the demise of the president, but because they are become a leading candidate the following election or two elections later. So I think she's an important figure, a daughter of immigrants, has is a Black woman, Southern Asian background, and a woman, and this will be the closest a woman has ever been one heartbeat away from the presidency. So, and I have to say, I think she was a good choice. I think she served Joe Biden well in the campaign, and I think she's yet had some history to make. So, and again, I say I'm biased because I've seen her close up and seen her work. I think she's extremely capable, and she's going to be a great vice president.
Stuart, if I can come to you, you were sort of saying earlier, really, and I think this is a very good way of summing it up, that Trump seemed to say things that some people thought, but felt that they were not allowed to say anymore. Is Kamala Harris going to fix the problem or help fix it?
It's a great question. I'm very hopeful on this. I think the power of having an African-American vice president like Senator Harris is going to be extraordinary. I think the message that it's going to send about the country, it's just difficult to imagine, I think, sitting here today, what it's going to be like. I find it very hopeful. And I think if I had to bet, I would say that she's going to be the dominant figure in American politics over the next decade. Odds are she will be president of the United States, and odds are she will be reelected. So, I think one of the lessons we've had in Trumpism and Trump era is that leaders really matter. Why is it that America didn't become fascist in the 30s when we had a huge fascist movement? Probably because Roosevelt was president and not Charles Lindbergh. So I think that it's very important and very powerful and very moving that she is the first female African-American vice president.
Thank you. I'm just looking at more questions coming in here. And we've had questions which I think really relate to Brexit, honestly, and the future of UK relations with the US. So 67 in Pembroke says he's asking about whether Biden really is. So the only deal the UK will get under his presidency, he says, will be the one his team negotiates with the EU. How well disposed is Joe Biden towards the UK? Phil, let's ask you that question if we can.
I think Angus is better qualified to respond to that, but I would say that from my knowing Joe Biden for 35 years and my interaction with him, I would say he has a very keen personal interest in and affection for the United Kingdom. He certainly identifies very much with all the United Kingdom and Ireland. What specifically the position is going to be dealing with the current trade issues, EU/UK/US, there's been not enough said at this point to see where his administration will go. I simply say that he is a coalition builder. I would be very surprised if he does not look to essentially anything possible that can strengthen transatlantic ties. The specifics of that trade-wise, I really can't address at this point.
And what would you think about that, Stuart? What do you think about the relationship between America and the UK and how it stands now and how much of a priority would be? I mean, that's not the same thing, of course, as wanting to strike a trade deal, but it's interesting what Biden has been very clear what his view on Brexit is, and it's not a positive.
Well, look, I mean, Joe Biden has a very different view of the world than Donald Trump, and I think Joe Biden's view is the right way. He embraces our allies. He understands the importance of our allies. He has a sophisticated, realistic view of the world and understands the power of our allies. I mean, one of the most destructive elements of the Trump presidency has been the downgrading of the importance of NATO. I mean, if Putin had been president, he couldn't have done a better job of this. Donald Trump looked at it like it was a parking development he had. You had to sort of pay up without understanding the power of it. So I think that not just with England, but across the board, our allies are going to feel like they're allies again, and that they're appreciated and valued. And the importance of that to the stability of the world. I mean, right now, America is not the leader of the free world. Germany is. Thank God Germany's there. Thank God Merkel's there. But I kind of like it the days when America was the leader of the free world. I think it's a role that we go back to playing.
Angus, what are your feelings in terms of international relations? We haven't yet touched on this, but it is an interesting question that, of course, President Trump took a particular view in terms of international relations. And I wondered whether you thought that had done lasting damage or had any lasting effect.
Well, I hope it doesn't do lasting damage. I mean, Stuart's right. I mean, Donald Trump always talked about his policy being America first. In practicality, what it really meant was America alone. For example, I think everyone realizes that we need to confront China. We need to deal with their mercantilist policies. We need to deal with their theft of intellectual property and their general abuse of the international trading system. But the way to do that is through allies, is through a multilateral, an international and worldwide coalition. And it wasn't that Donald Trump was wrong in the goal, but the means were not well suited to what was to be achieved. Your man Winston Churchill put it very well. He said the only thing worse than fighting with allies is fighting without allies. And that's what Donald Trump has tried to do. I think the other thing to know about Joe Biden is he has a long history in international relations. He was chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. He's traveled widely. I suspect he's probably met 2/3 of the leaders of the countries in the world personally. And so I think his approach will be the polar opposite of Donald Trump's, of taking on international problems, but doing it from the point of view of positive relationships and alliances. And as far as the details of what will the lobster tariff be with Britain versus the EU, I can't really predict that. They ought to be low, by the way. But I think I think we're going to see a return to multilateralism, a return to the strength of and respect for NATO, and I think that's going to be a good thing. It's not bad to confront China. The question is, how do you do it? And I'm hopeful that Joe Biden will do it in a more efficacious way than Donald Trump.
Stuart, there is a strange sort of overlap in the sort of me first. When you sometimes get extremes on a political spectrum, then sometimes you come back to the same thing. And I don't think one would necessarily describe Biden as protectionist, Stuart, but I wonder if he might strangely have some of the same thoughts as Donald Trump when it comes to trade.
You know, it's fascinating to me as someone who probably made 1,000 ads saying Republicans were for free trade. Donald Trump is to the left of Bernie Sanders on trade, as far as I can figure. It's very strange. I suppose by the fact that Donald Trump has made it favorable to be for tariffs, strangely, with what's supposed to be the center-right party in America, that a movement by a Democratic president to have some reasonable tariffs that might serve a purpose will be easier to execute. Though I think there's going to be a lot of hypocrisy about this. Republican Party really doesn't have an ideology now. There is no articulable center-right conservative platform in America. Republican Party is against Democrats. It exists to elect Republicans. It's more to me like a cartel than an organized political party. So this is going to be fascinating to see. I mean, will Republicans all of a sudden now discover that they're against the deficit after Donald Trump just blew it out more than any other president in history? We'll see.
Oh, I think we've lost Stuart then again briefly. Let's then come back to Phil if we can. Phil, you've had to take a wide perspective many times, of course, during the course of your career. And I want to ask you now, what's going to happen over the next few years? What role is America going to play?
Well, we first need to get through between now and January 20th, because there are a number of things that President Trump can do that can upset some apple carts, whether it's a matter of sanctions with Iran that could make it more difficult for President Biden to have to rejoin that agreement, what can happen in Paris climate change efforts, the restoration of drilling in the Arctic refuge, wildlife refuge, a whole series of activities. But post January 20th, assuming a Biden-Harris presidency and vice presidency, I look to a very strong period, as the others have suggested, of multilateral cooperation, of reaching across partisan divides, the sense of a direct, honest, cautious voice in the White House, a sense of personal responsibility and integrity. And I can't help but think that that serves both the American nation well, but the entire world well. So I'm very optimistic in terms of the prospects, but let's not take for granted how overwhelming in many ways the odds are. Not only the Republican opposition, but this difficult coalition perhaps within the Democratic Party, the fact that it moves very quickly. And from his vice presidency, Joe Biden knows he has to act quickly on some very major initiatives. And then finally, just the fact that we have 150 judges appointed by President Trump, whose conservative viewpoints may essentially alter what a Biden administration can get through. And the fact that because of the Administrative Procedures Act and the bureaucracy, rolling back regulations to where they were will not be an overnight activity. That being said, I'm very enthusiastic and positive about what the next 4 years will ensue.
Angus, if I could come to you, the next 4 years, where will America be in 4 years' time?
I think there's so many variables. One of the variables is Mitch McConnell, as I mentioned. One of the variables is Donald Trump. One of the variables is the extent to which his followers remain so dedicated or go back to their daily lives and don't pay so much attention. And it depends on what kind of elections we have at the midterms and whether Joe Biden can maintain a majority in the House and pick up a few seats in the Senate. It's so you're looking for a lot of variables. But I'll go back to something Stuart said at the beginning. I think the American people are exhausted, and I think they are ready for some level of normalcy. Not to quote our President Harding, who I think his motto was back a return to normalcy or something along those lines. But I think people are ready for that, and I think they're ready for a calming influence. They're also ready for competence, for being able to run the government in a competent and effective way. So I think I hope that I think what I'm leading up to is saying we want politics to be boring again, and not be so obsessed with it at every moment of every day. And I think Joe Biden is going to bring that quality. In many ways, in retrospect, he was the perfect candidate for this year. He just sort of exudes decency and competence and normalcy. And people, I remember they complained that, he's not exciting enough and he's not charismatic enough. I think the public has had enough of that for a while. So I'm optimistic. I think we're going to be able to take on some problems like climate change. And certainly we've got to deal with this virus. We haven't talked much about it, but I assume it's resurging there as it is here, and it's a hell of a serious problem getting from here to the distribution of the vaccine. But I'm optimistic. I think America is resilient, and I think it's going to demonstrate that over the next couple of years.
Stuart, will you be continuing your work within the Republican Party?
I really am not a Republican anymore. I just can't do it. And I'm going to work with Democrats to the extent that Democrats will have me. I have a lot of friends who are Republicans who feel that the next step is to become an independent and support, well, in the presidential race, they didn't support Joe Biden, but I enthusiastically, and the Lincoln Project, we enthusiastically supported President Biden. It's nice to be able to say that. I think we have a two-party system, and you need to pick a side. So I think the Republican Party right now is a negative force in America, and I don't know what I can do inside that party to reduce that negativity. I think the best thing you can do is defeat it. And out of defeat will come a more sane center-right party. But I'm gonna, I'll be a Joe Biden Democrat and be happy to be it.
Stuart Stevens, Phil Lader, and also Angus King, thank you, all of you, for joining us this evening. It's been a great honor to have you join us. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya.
Tanya, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. On behalf of all of us from Pembroke College and the University of Oxford. Tonight we have witnessed firsthand the breadth of American political opinion and the depth of concern on all sides for continuing constitutional progress as against partial factual conclusions. We've heard of the likely problems of divided control as between both houses and the president-elect, the significance of Georgia, the legacy of President Trump, and interesting financial questions, including trade, expenditure on the election, and of course, our special relationship. We've heard a great deal about division and some hope of good governance, which is perhaps the only way forward to future trust, respect, and confidence for all of us. I'm deeply grateful to each of our panel members, Senator Angus King, Ambassador Phil Lader, and Stuart Stevens for making the time to participate, particularly when they are so busy, and also to Tanya for moderating these proceedings so skillfully tonight. May I also thank Steve Atkinson, chair of our Alumni Advisory Board, who had the inspired idea to hold this event. I'd also like to thank Tom for co-hosting, and Andrew and Emma from the college's development office for organizing tonight's event. Many thanks to more than 300 of you who have eventually logged on and joined us this evening, particularly colleagues from across the university and Pembroke alumni here in the United Kingdom and around the world. If you've enjoyed this event, then do keep an eye on our website and the college's social media channels to find out more about future offerings. We really do hope you will join us again in the future. And until then, goodbye and keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you.